confirms some 40 million Americans, including my parents back in Cleveland, have now received the COVID-19 vaccine. That's about 15% of the population. Doctors say that once we have reached about 50% immunity, the lockdowns and mask mandates can begin to be lifted. It goes without saying, 2020 was a year like no other, and most of us would welcome a return to normal, and the sooner the better. Still, according to the CDC's estimates, some 500,000 Americans have died from COVID-19. Victims who, of course, deserve to be honored and remembered. But while the human death toll is staggering and an ongoing tragedy, we lost more than people and businesses to the pandemic. Also lost this past year was the American dream. And it died almost without a fight or even notice. No CDC charts to show its passing. This past year, tens of millions of Americans became unemployed, and as many as 20 million of those are still unemployed. And yes, hundreds of thousands of American businesses were forced to close because of government-mandated lockdowns. According to estimates from the United States Small Business Administration, fully 1/3 of the small businesses closed over the past year will never reopen. That is devastating to an entire generation of middle class, particularly minority small business owners. But the loss of jobs, income, and businesses is not proof that the American dream was destroyed in 2020. That's because the American dream, the true American dream, has nothing to do with homes, with money, with college degrees, or even owning your own business. The true American dream was something else entirely. For several generations now, we have allowed the American dream to be defined as some kind of form of economic or social status. As most Americans know it, the American dream means owning your own home, having a steady job, and having access to health care. It meant something like sending your kids to college and giving them opportunities that you may not have had yourself. But the real American dream, the one that has existed since shots were first fired by Minutemen across Lexington Green, is not defined by cars or houses or some kind of economic status. No, that's a false version of the American dream. And maybe it was doomed to fail. Let's say we allow the American dream to be defined as home ownership, a college degree, cars, jobs, health insurance. Doesn't that sound like a Bernie Sanders list of rights that should simply exist for everyone? And because not everyone achieves these milestones, isn't that evidence that capitalism and the free market have failed? And that the American system of government has failed? Even that the Western values on which our society is based have failed? By allowing the American dream to be oriented, as some liberal Democrats do, around material things that society should deliver, the very character of our nation was forever changed. Transformed from a system of government based on the observance and acceptance of the natural principles of humankind to a system of government that is tasked with ensuring every American has a car, house, and college degree. So by default, that means the political debate here in D.C. is a constant back and forth about the best policies to deliver those material goals. This means the individual rights of each of us are lost documents held in the National Archives, gathering dust on a shelf. But of course, that definition is wrong. The Americans who stood against the British at Lexington and Concord certainly weren't thinking about how all this new country they were making was going to deliver a checklist of material goods for them. That wasn't why they rebelled against a tyrannical king. Today, we don't ask our soldiers to fight to make the ultimate sacrifice just for more stuff. We ask them to fight for our liberties and our way of life. The true American dream has nothing to do with cars and houses. Rather, it is that every man, woman, and child is a free and independent being. That here in this country, your natural, self-evident rights will be respected by law. It was that dream that made people from all over the world want to upend their lives and move their families here. If you doubt that, I invite you to reread the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. There is no mention of homes, cars, material worth, college degrees, medical care, or even access to clean water. There's no guarantee of income or social status. The American dream is founded on two things: individual freedom, and equal justice before the law. During the past year, that true American dream was under attack. The government's response to COVID-19 demonstrated that the materialistic American dream may have buried the foundational American dream forever. On the whole, consider how little pushback there was this past year to government lockdown measures, to business closures, to religious services, and to family gatherings. For the most part, Americans simply took the orders and followed them. Never mind that most of them were plainly unconstitutional. And even today, most of the discussion around recovery and a return to normal is, of course, measured by the new American dream yardstick: money, jobs, homes, cars, healthcare, and college. Add to that list, President Biden has dropped in a couple vague concepts like social justice and climate justice and racial justice, and whatever those things end up meaning is anyone's guess. The American dream should never have been allowed to become about material achievements, wealth, or social status. Those things, the cars and houses, are the natural outcome of the true American dream, which is, and always was, liberty, free markets, and each individual's right to choose how and when to apply their talents, ingenuity, and money. Quite literally, the true American dream, your freedom, is the very thing that enabled Bernie Sanders' materialistic American dream to exist at all. In case there's any doubt that free markets can do and succeed in generating massive wealth, consider this: America is less than 4% of the world's population, but we represent 27% of the world's GDP and over 35% of the world's total wealth. America represents the longest running and largest real-world experiment in the history of the world, and all kinds of other empirical data. The scientific result of that experiment is that individual liberty and free market economics are the surest way to ever conceive to generate the most prosperity. That is where the American dream of the founding fathers and the progressive dream of the liberal progressives differ. By allowing the success of our system to be measured by how widely wealth is distributed, we'll always be in a constant process of shaping our politics and economics by rules and policies that are focused on wealth redistribution. It's pretty simple math. And there's the irony, because it turns out the real way to generate and spread the most wealth across most people is free market capitalism. Statism didn't lift more than 2 billion people out of poverty since 1980. Capitalism did. Socialism and Marxism didn't make America the wealthiest nation on earth. American entrepreneurs operating in free markets did that. That is the truth. That is what science says. Freedom is the prerequisite condition that enables wealth to be generated in the first place. Tragically, that's the American dream that the COVID-19 pandemic may have eliminated from American history. The good news, though, is that the excuse used to kill it, the pandemic, was finally coming to an end. And that means we get a chance to restore individual liberty and Americans' prosperity. Here today, to help explore what Americans can do to restore the American dream, is Utah's newest Congressman, Burgess Owens. Representative, it's an honor to have you here with us today.
My pleasure, Adam. My pleasure. But by the way, before we get started, first of all, thank you for sending me that monologue last night. It is awesome. I hope people really should get print it out, seriously, because I woke up early this morning, literally woke up early thinking about it and thinking about my renowned definition of what the American dream is and who is really impacting us and what's going to make it happen. So I just want to thank you for that. It's given me a new, refreshing way of thinking about it and letting everybody know that we could all live it. It was just a matter of how our attitudes, when we look at it, and how we perceive ourselves.
Well, Burgess, let me tell you, the reason I was thinking about talking about the American dream is we're such a divided country. And I think if you don't have a common goal, it's hard to figure out how you can talk to each other again. And until we can start to redefine what the American dream is, I think we're going to be pretty split for a while. And that's why I want to start tackling that subject. So let me throw you the first question. Burgess, what's your definition of the American dream?
Okay. I'm going to give you that. Let me just say this one thing about our division, and before I answer that. You know, we have a country that is the greatest in the history of mankind because of our Judeo-Christian values, and because of those three words that begin the mission statement, we the people. And you're right, we're divided in terms of the way we think, but we've always been that way. The difference is we the people in the past have always been able to talk. We put our thinking caps on, we try to explain our way of thinking, and our goal at the end of the day is respectfully agree to disagree. We come back with another way of trying to get our thoughts across. When we the people started talking again, and that's Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, started really talking about our end game, we're going to be just fine. And the first thing we're going to realize is that we're not each other's enemy. We have an ideology that's very dark, deep, devious, and angry. It's called Marxism, socialism, that has always destroyed everything it's touched. And as we understand that is our enemy, and we come together as friends, we come together with things that we can agree on, like our flag, our national anthem, our sports teams, we will begin to defeat that enemy that we have at our doorsteps. It's been there for a long time. Now, in terms of the American dream, first of all, again, I have redefined what that really means, because at the end of the day, what it is that our life is supposed to be about is, what do we add to the American fabric? What does our life mean when it all comes to the very end? Is it the car we have? Is the house we have? I tell you, for one who's kind of gone through the process of having a lot, losing a lot, getting it back, I realized a lot of stuff really doesn't make any difference in the long game. Is what is our impact? I think about my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather dropped out of school at third grade. My grandmother got her high school degree at 50 years old. But what did they give to this country? They had 4 children, my dad being one. 2 of them got their PhDs in the 1950s. Another one it was an engineer. This was in segregated days of segregation in the 1950s and 60s. Another one was an engineer and had a side-time business with an airplane that he would travel from Wichita Falls, Texas to Chicago, taking mail back and forth from the military bases. What she had a chance to experience was to see that her hope, her belief in the American way, and my granddad, and their example of just believing that they could overcome was transferred from one generation to where my grandmother had a chance to see her grandson playing a Super Bowl championship and another granddaughter who was a very successful physician. The American dream is not in the tangible. It's what have we added to our society, and what at the end of our day, when we look back, what have I meant to my community? Can I at the end of the day say that my life has made a difference? And if it has, and if it's even if it's only in the family that we have impacted, that's good enough. I will say this: my grandmother and grandfather has had more impact on this country and the American dream than Bill Gates. He'll be known, and he'll be a footnote one day as somebody who made a great product. But in terms of what he's done to our country, for the hopes of American citizens, for bringing us together, for the lives of those who are unborn, he will be a footnote. But my grandmother and grandfather, we talked about forever, for generations, because of the impact they've had on me. And my success is only a reflection of them and my great community I grew up in, a great community in Tallahassee, Florida, segregated, days of KKK, Jim Crow, and it's being lost today purposely, because for us to tell the story of success, to say that no matter how you get here, when you get here, what language you speak, doesn't matter. As long as you hold to the tenets of faith, family, education, and free market, we are one generation away from the middle class. And that's the message of my race, of the Italian race, of the Jewish race, all those races that were not assimilating during the early 20th century, but all succeeded because we wanted to have the respect of our fellow Americans. And we can only do that through meritocracy. Meritocracy is living the American dream. Faith, hope, and a vision for a new generation coming behind us is going to be much better off than we are. That is the American dream. And I tell you, we have to get back to that. I think we will. I think what's happened this last year, the contrast, we're finally, Adam, as a country, it's no longer hypothetical in my mind. We don't have to talk about the damage and the anger and and what comes from these hard left. We can see it. And once we see it, believe me, I don't care what party we're part of. Families want their kids to go back to school. Parents want to go out and go to work. We don't make sure those that are vulnerable want to get their vaccine. And those who begin to talk those common goals and objectives will come together, and we realize that those who don't want us to be there, wants to be divided, angry, failing, we don't drift that direction. We drift toward the light, and that's the American way. So again, thank you for this new perspective, because my grandmom and my granddad, boy, I tell you what, they lived the American dream in such a grand fashion.
Well, Representative Owens, I have so many more questions for you. I hope you become a regular on the program. I feel like we just scratched the surface. It's been been fun getting to know you. And we hope the rest of you will stick around as our host, John Tamney, is joined by
brilliant medical minds with capital. Translated, economic growth produces the resources necessary for visionaries from all walks of life to help people triumph over injuries and illnesses that used to sideline or kill them. This rates serious mention and serious thought as President Biden continues to stump for a $1.9 trillion spending bill. Worse is that Biden is being prodded by the progressive Elizabeth Warren wing of his party to make a wealth tax a law.
It's time for a wealth tax in America. You know, I have proposed a 2-cent wealth tax. That is a tax for everybody who has more than $50 billion in assets. This one says all your assets, wherever located, and we're going to keep counting.
Now, a wealth tax would specifically target the rich, which is why it would be so economically harmful. Lest we forget, the rich, by virtue of being rich, can't spend it all. Crucial about this is that their unspent wealth exists as investment necessary to rush the future into the present. Because the rich have unspent wealth, they can match it with the talented people working feverishly to erase injuries and illness, but also those eager to make today's abundant present appear primitive relative to what can be achieved tomorrow. Now, will most of their investments succeed? No, which is kind of the point. The rich uniquely have wealth they're capable of losing on intrepid investments. So when politicians seek to neuter them, they're rather explicitly slowing the expensive trial and error without which there is no economic progress, and without which there will be no advances that render surmountable what used to not be. Now, with us to discuss the Biden stimulus plan, along with the wealth tax, is private equity investor extraordinaire John Childs. Welcome, John.
Hi, glad to be here, John.
Thanks so much. Now, last week you wrote an excellent piece for the New York Sun where you argue that Senator Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax attacks one of the pillars of American greatness. Could you tell us more of what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, wealth has been sort of central to the whole story of America. When you think of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, wealth may not be synonymous with happiness, but the two are closely related, right? When you think about it, wealth is so central to some of the things that are tremendous about America. And let me just give you a couple of examples. People think about, how do you create jobs? Well, you create jobs when you create companies. And a good example of that would be Walmart. Today, Walmart employs over 2 million people. That's how you create jobs. You let people create wealth, you let them create enterprise, and the jobs will follow. The other thing that I think is extraordinarily and perhaps uniquely American, that is a function of wealth, is all of the great philanthropic enterprises that have been created by wealth. These are all functions of wealth, and the idea to attack it, as Elizabeth Warren is proposing, is uniquely un-American.
Well, you hit on something so important. Wealth is created first, and people forget that. It doesn't just happen. It's not pulled from the sky. It's a result of innovation, of people making things better. The rich, by virtue of being rich, uniquely have funds for investment. And so wouldn't a wealth tax not just put a tax on those creating progress, but it'd put a tax on the very job creation that creates opportunity for tens of millions of people?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, the pursuit of wealth has been what creates the great enterprises. A lot of these people who have wealth didn't start wealthy. In the process of doing it, they've created millions of jobs. So this whole, the pursuit of wealth has so many benefits for mankind. It's hard to understand how someone would want to attack that and slow it down. Wealth should be encouraged, not discouraged.
Well, you put it so well in saying that wealth spreads its wings far and wide. It improves people around it immensely, and it also is the number one enemy of ill health and disease and death that the world has ever known. It's staggering to think that some in the political class want to penalize what has improved so many lives so stupendously. John, thank you so much for coming here today and talking about this. We're very grateful and hope you'll come back at a later date. When we come back, Adam Brandon will be back to dive into one of the left's biggest federal power grabs in years, H.R. 1.
The Democrats in Congress want you to believe they're doing this for you. It's called the For the People Act, after all. They're going to make sure that the government, quote, expands Americans' access to the ballot box, reduces the influence of big money in politics, strengthens ethics rules for public servants, and implements other anti-corruption measures for the purpose of fortifying our democracy and for other purposes. And as Congressman Sarbanes from Maryland just explained, they're only doing it because they have listened to you, the people. But are they really listening to the Americans they're supposed to serve? FreedomWorks and RMG Research conducted a poll last week, and here's what you told us that you wanted when it comes to protecting our elections, our free speech, and democracy. Only 15% of you don't want to require voters to show photo ID, while over 5 times as many of you, 79%, want to require an ID. 2/3 of Americans don't want the voting age changed. Only 32% of us want mail-in ballots automatically sent to all registered voters, while nearly double that, 61%, want ballots sent only to voters who request them. And over 50% of Americans oppose taxpayer funding of candidates. With such a majority of Americans opposed to many of the proposals in H.R. 1, why are Democrats working so feverishly to push it through? Here to help us understand this bloated and complicated bill are the new Congresswoman from New Mexico, Yvette Harrell, and the President and CEO of Donors Trust, Lawson Bader. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Representative, the Democrats have done such a good job of presenting this bill in a positive light. Is their rosy rhetoric accurate, or are they hiding a different agenda behind all that pretty talk?
Yeah, actually, this bill could not be further from the truth. We've got to bear in mind, this is not about the people. This H.R. 1 is all about the politicians. And the reforms, so-called reforms they're talking about, are devastating. I mean, our voters want fair and transparent election processes. This bill does not do it. It absolutely compromises who can vote in our elections. But worst of all, what I'm sure they're not telling people is this bill actually takes hard-earned taxpayer money and gives it to the power-hungry politicians for political campaign ads.
Wow. So, Lawson, H.R. 1, it confiscates constitutional authority of states to regulate how they do voter registration and the voting process. It gives the federal government jurisdiction over implementing automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, online voter registration. How is this going to change voting in America, and is it even constitutional?
Well, I think there are already a few lawyers looking at the question of constitutionality, so I'll leave that to the honorables out there. But the real issue at heart, besides the fact that this is going to increase a lot of legal fees, a lot of government regulation, and decrease a lot of free speech, is that it fundamentally alters the relationship between the citizen and the state. Well, citizen and state comes to how do we argue ideas. Social causes come and go, and the minority may not be popular one year. It may become majority the next year, but people should be able to argue their case. And anything that restricts that is fundamentally anti-American.
So, Lawson, I know there are provisions in H.R. 1 that get at donor privacy. And I've spoken with you before how important the essence of donor privacy is to our system. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Donor privacy is woven into the fabric of this country. If we go back to the Federalist Papers, which were written anonymously, and talk about the influence they had. Political free speech, since Citizens United, is about voting with your hand and voting with your money in cases. And not being allowed to keep that quiet is actually fundamentally important. And the reality in today's cancel culture, that the examples are replete of what happens to you, your family, your businesses, your employees when it comes out that you simply approved or disapproved of a particular issue that somebody else found the opposite of.
Congresswoman Harrell, one of the provisions in this bill would make it more difficult to remove voters who have moved or died from the voting rolls. What is the purpose to potentially keep these folks on voter rolls?
Right. And we saw this problem in New Mexico in 2018 and actually in other states around the nation. And that does beg the question, why don't we have clean voter rolls? And in some cases in New Mexico, we did a very extensive search after the 2018 elections and found that we had a number of people who had either moved out of state, moved to a different county, or had actually died, but yet they were still casting ballots. And let's just follow the law and make opportunities so that we will have the fair and transparent elections, kind of like the Save Democracy Act that I'm a co-sponsor of. That is a true reform bill that does help establish a transparent election process.
So I want to get back to a little bit more about H.R. 1 and some of these just insane provisions in here. A lot of this gets back to campaign finance. Congresswoman, I know there's some elements that would provide immense public funding of campaigns. Why is it a bad idea to bring federal tax dollars into the political system like this?
Well, I think it's a backdoor way of getting more money into the coffers of politicians that are really power hungry. And why should we be doing that? I believe we have the opportunity to support whichever candidate we want to, whether it is at the ballot box or through a contribution. And it's another way to control the American people, their pocketbooks and their thought process. And so, again, there is so much wrong with this bill that you're right. The American people probably have not seen all of it, haven't had time to dig into the real problems that are, we're just scratching the surface here. But that's, to me, it's a misrepresentation of what government should be. And to use taxpayer dollars for campaign ad funding is absolutely wrong.
All right, there is so much more material to unload in this bill. Hopefully you two can stick around, and we'll get right back to this after the break. Welcome back. We are here with Congresswoman Yvette Herrell and Lawson Bader talking about how the left and progressives are trying to rig the election system in favor of politicians by undermining America's electoral process with H.R. 1. Lawson, H.R. 1 will give the federal government vast control over what is considered political speech, basically rendering the First Amendment. The First Amendment would definitely be at risk here. Shouldn't Americans get to decide who and what they support by choosing for themselves what they say and how they spend their money?
Theoretically, you think that's how it was created. At least that's how I read about it and experience it every day. Yes, it would. Again, it's part of that fundamental relationship we have as free men and women in this country to pursue ideas that may be unpopular or popular, and we may win one day and we may lose another day, and that's the give and take that occurs. But some of the things that are in this bill, such as the politicalization of the Federal Election Commission itself, is of concern. What has been essentially a completely bipartisan process that is intentionally frustrating at times. That's the idea, is now moved into a completely politicized situation. And that's where I think we start to see the problems. But again, I am concerned as people are fearful of getting more engaged because their names are going to be revealed in some way, or their businesses or their families, they're simply going to stop engaging. And when we have a citizenry that's unengaged completely, then we literally have become just a nation of sheep.
How can we stop this bill? What would you want the American folks to do right now to make their voices heard?
Well, I hope they're reaching out to their elected officials. And there's such a distrust with politicians right now, with those representing American people. And this just adds another layer to that with the uncertainty that's happening every day and with the executive orders that we've seen. Again, this H.R. 1 just compounds everything that we're seeing that's not good for the American people. And in this bill, where we're really going to control the way they elect a new official, we're compromising that and that freedom. And we have to remember, we are grateful for the men and women that served our nation, kept us free, so that we have a right to go and vote and cast this ballot. And this bill does nothing but compromise that. And it is, again, we're just scratching the surface because there's so much bad in this bill. We're losing more faith from our voters because there is going to be no motivation to get out and vote if they feel that their vote is not going to be matter, or if the elections are going to be tarnished in some way. So this is very, very serious. And I hope that the voters will take some time and learn about the vote or the bill, but also reach out and get their voices heard so that we can fight against this in Congress.
Well, look, I appreciate both of you for joining. H.R. 1 is not getting the airtime I believe it deserves. This is such an amazing challenge to our basic Republican system of government. And I appreciate you both for joining and starting to raise some of these concerns. So when we come back, we will tackle another of the progressive power grabs, education, teachers unions, parents, and schools.